He could not stand it. He slowly reached for the bell and rang. In half a minute he rang again, louder. No answer. To go on ringing in vain was pointless. It did not suit him. The old woman was certainly at home, but she was alone and suspicious. He was familiar with her habits, and he pressed his ear to the door. Either his senses were extremely sharp, or it was quite audible, but he suddenly discerned something like a cautious sound of a hand on the door latch, and something like a rustle of a dress against the door itself. Someone was standing silently just at the latch, hiding inside and listening. In the same way he was outside, and also, it seemed, with an ear to the door. He stirred and muttered something aloud, so not to make it seem like he was hiding. Then he rang for the third time, but quietly. A second later came the sound of the latch being lifted. The door, as before, was opened a tiny crack, and again 2 sharp, mistrustful eyes stared at him from the darkness. Here Raskolnikov became flustered and made a serious mistake. Fearing the woman would be frightened that they were alone, and no hope that his looks would reassure her, he took hold of the door and pushed it towards her so that she would not decide to lock herself in. She did not pull the door back towards her, and did not let go of the handle. The woman jumped aside in fear, and was about to say something, but seemed unable to. "Good evening, Alyona Ivanovna," he began as casually as he could, but his voice faltered and started trembling. "I brought you an article, but we'd better go over there, near the light." And leaving her, he walked straight into the room uninvited. The old woman ran after him. Her tongue came untied. "What is it? Who are you? What's your business?" "For pity's sake, Alyona Ivanovna, you know me, Raskolnikov. Here, I brought you the pledge, the one I promised you the other day." He was holding the pledge out to her. The old woman glanced at it, and then fixed her eyes directly on the eyes of her uninvited visitor. She looked at him intently and mistrustfully. A minute or so passed. He thought he saw something like mockery in her eyes, if she had already guessed everything. He felt himself becoming flustered, almost frightened. He was frightened that it seemed that if she were to look at him like that, without saying a word, for another half-minute he would run away from her. "But why are you looking at me like that, as if you didn't recognize me?" he suddenly asked, also with spite. "If you want it, take it, otherwise I'll go somewhere else. I have no time." He did not intend to say this, but it got said. The old woman came to her senses, and her visitor's resolute tone seemed to encourage her. "But what's the matter, dearie, so suddenly? What is it?" she asked, looking at the pledge. "A silver cigarette case, I told you last time." She held out her hand. "But why are you so pale? Look, your hands are trembling. Did you go for a swim, dearie, or what?" "Fever," he answered abruptly. "You can't help getting pale when you have nothing to eat." His strength was abandoning him, but the answer sounded plausible. The old woman took the pledge. "What is it?" she asked, once again looking Raskolnikov over intently. "An article, a cigarette case, silver. Take a look. It doesn't seem like silver. It's all wrapped up." Trying to untie the string and going to the window to the light, she left him and turned her back to him. He unbuttoned his coat and freed the axe from the loop, but did not take it out of his coat. He held it just in his right hand, under the coat. His hands were terribly weak. He felt them growing more and more numb and stiff every moment. He was afraid he would let go and drop the axe. Suddenly, his head seemed to spin. "Look how he's wrapped it up!" the old woman exclaimed in vexation, and made a move towards him. He could not waste even one more moment. He took the axe all the way out, swung it with both hands, scarcely aware of himself, and almost without effort, almost mechanically, brought the butt head down on her head. His own strength seemed to have no part in it, but the moment he brought the axe down, strength was born in him. The old woman was bareheaded as always. Because she was short, the blow happened to land right on the crown of her head. She cried out, but very faintly, and her whole body suddenly sank to the floor, though she still managed to raise both hands to her head. In one hand she was still holding the pledge. Then he struck her again and yet again with all his strength, both times at the butt end, both times on the crown of her head. Blood poured out as from an overturned glass, and the body fell backwards. He stepped aside, letting it fall, and immediately bent down to her face. He set the axe down on the floor and immediately put his hand into her pocket, trying not to smear himself with blood. The same right pocket from which he had taken the keys the last time. He immediately pulled out the keys. They were all in one bunch. He immediately ran to the bedroom with them.
So you think you've got
was a very
friends
small
in
room.
high places?
There was a huge stand with icons, and against the opposite wall, a large bed, quite clean, covered with silk patchwork quilt.
Give us these smiles.
Against the third wall was a chest of drawers. Strangely, as soon as he began applying the keys to the drawers, as soon as he heard their jingling, it was as if a convulsion ran through him. He wanted to
Playing
leave.
with the big boys
He
now.
fancied that the old woman might still be alive and might recover her senses. He ran back to her body, seized the axe, and raised it once more time over the old woman, but did not bring it down.
Boys now.
There was no doubt that she was dead.
With the big boys now.
Around her neck he noticed a string. He tugged at it, it wouldn't come free. He raised the axe and tried to cut it. With difficulty he cut the string without touching the body with the axe and took it off. He was not mistaken, a purse. The purse was stuffed full. He shoved it in his pocket without looking. He was terribly hurried, snatched up the keys and began fumbling with them again. He rushed back to the bedroom. He kept mistaking keys and they would not fit. Suddenly he turned to the bed. He found gold watches. He started shoving them in his pockets without looking at them.
And just to show we feel no spite, you can be our acolyte. But first, boy, it's time to bow.
Was the sound of footsteps in the room where the old woman lay. He stopped, still as death, but everything was quiet. He must have imagined it. Suddenly there came a slight but distinct cry, or more as if someone softly and abruptly moaned, and then fell silent. Again there was a dead silence for a minute or two. He sat crouched by the trunk and waited, barely breathing, then suddenly jumped up, seized the axe, and ran out of the bedroom. Lisabetta was standing in the middle of the room with a big bundle in her hands, frozen, staring at her murdered sister, white as a sheet, as if unable to utter a cry. Seeing him run in, she trembled like a leaf, with a faint quivering, and spasms ran across her whole face. She raised her hand, opened her mouth, yet still did not utter a cry, and began slowly backing away from him into the corner, staring at him fixedly, point blank, but still not uttering a sound, as if she did not have breath enough to cry out. He rushed at her with the axe. She brought her free left hand up very slightly, nowhere near her face, and slowly stretched it out towards him, as if to keep him away. The blow landed directly on her skull, with the sharp edge, and immediately split the whole upper part of the forehead, almost to the crown. She collapsed. Raskolnikov, utterly at a loss, snatched up her bundle, dropped it again, and ran to the entryway.
What time I feel? I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. It's as sweet as candy. Its taste is on my mind. Girl, you got me thirsty for a love.